the newsagents.
Rather than make the right long-term decisions for the country, he's taken the easy way out. It is typical of the principles-free, conviction-free type of leadership that he offers. Flip-flopping from being a builder to a blocker. Mr. Speaker, the British public can't trust a word he says.
This is the new battleground that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, was setting up today in Prime Minister's Questions. Do you want to see a party that gets on with things, that builds houses, or a party that blocks things, like Keir Starmer? And today we're asking whether, to flip it round, we are really being made to choose between more houses and clean water. That's the way Labour is framing the argument. Is that fair?
Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's Emily.
And it's Lewis. And later on, we are going to be returning to something that was on the show yesterday, which created, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a war of words between the Labour Party and the Lib Dems, which is exactly how nasty is the by-election in mid-Bedfordshire becoming, and exactly what has been said about whom in terms of the local candidates, and what does it all tell us, this acrimony, about whether actually in the end it'll probably be the Tories who come through the middle.
Yeah, today we get the response of the Lib Dems. But we're going to start with houses v sewage, because that's...
What a lineup.
I know, lucky you. That is the way that this whole thing is being framed. Do you want fresh houses? Fresh houses. Do you want new houses or fresh water?
You don't think Britain's screwed, do you?
I mean, it's quite the choice.
Do you want houses, or do you want?
Oh, you can have a clean.
Be able to flush a toilet.
Yeah, do you want a clean river, or do you want a new house? All the rest of it. This is pretty much the way Labour is framing this argument. They're saying, "Oh my God, the Conservatives have been in power for 13 years. They finally decide to get on and build some houses. And the only way they can do that is by changing the environment regulations, what they call the nutrient neutral regulations that allow where you can or can't build." And to explain, there is quite a lot that lands in this legislation, because yes, I'm going to say it again, the nutrient neutral stuff comes from the EU. And Rishi Sunak's government, Michael Gove, in fact, who was Levelling Up Minister, was basically putting this forward as a way of saying, scrap those rules, scrap regulations, and you watch, we'll be able to get loads and loads of new houses built.
How neutral are you about nutrients in your experience?
I'm very, very pro-nutrient.
Are you?
Massively.
All the nutrients?
I would say I'm partisan.
Vitamin A,
Yeah.
vitamin B. We had this at the
favourite?
BBC, of course. We're always very impartial.
I'm a
about
vitamin
the
D
nutrients.
girl.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me.
No.
This is a thing that has this idea around nutrient neutrality rules, which is on one level a bit arcane. I mean, it's been part of politics really for the last couple of weeks. A couple of weeks ago, Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, said that he was abandoning EU-related rules, as Emily was saying, with regards to nutrient neutrality. Now, nutrient neutrality in relation to house building basically means that when developers build new homes in protected areas, they are required to provide mitigations to ensure that no new additional nutrients, such as nitrogen and phosphorus, make it into Britain's waterways, so like rivers and lakes, where they can cause, I don't think this is something we've said on a podcast before, algal blooms that deprive plants and animals of light and oxygen, i.e. they pollute the riverways and the waterways and so on. And of course, the government says that this will unlock about 100,000, 135,000 homes or so that are currently being bogged down in the planning system that developers cannot get off the ground, as it were, because of these rules. And everyone thought that this was going to go forward. Lisa Nandy, when she was, until last week, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, had indicated that she would support it. But today, the new Levelling Up Secretary, Angela Rayner, Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Angela Rayner, and the new Shadow Environment Secretary, Steve Reed, have written a piece in the Times saying that Labour peers, Labour members of the House of Lords, are going to oppose these changes in the Lords as they come up for a vote tonight. And because of quite obscure parliamentary processes which need not detain us, in this particular circumstance, that means that this will be dead if they vote against it. Because unlike usual, because of these particular circumstances, the Commons will not be able to send it back in this process that we call parliamentary ping pong. Basically, it will be dead on arrival and these changes won't happen.
Because we think the Lib Dems will also vote against it and that will be the end. And you might cynically say no one would be happier with that outcome than Conservative MPs who maybe for lots of reasons don't particularly want to see massive rounds of house building in, as it were, their backyard, in their constituents. Maybe their constituents don't want to see a huge number of new houses being built right where they are living. And yet the government has to be on the front foot for this. It has to get to grips with house building because that is a sign of something that's in absolute stasis in our country. And we know, we've talked about it on the newsagents before, just how many of the younger generation are struggling even to rent because housing is so tight, let alone to be able to afford a place of their own. I think it's worth saying, and this I suppose goes to a wider question, which is regulation, good or bad. There is a sort of default, which is, when we talk about red tape or regulation, the Conservatives say, cut red tape. And Labour say, lose all the workers' protection or whatever. And of course, there are grey areas to this whole thing. And Robert Colville, I'm going to cite here, writes quite a detailed blog on this today. He's a columnist. And he does go into depth with what this, should we say it one more time, the nutrient neutrality means, and whether, are we actually talking about rules that, are we talking about Erin Brockovich? Are we talking about Flint, Michigan? Are we talking about rules that actually stop whole villages and wells being poisoned? Or are we just talking about preserving a specific species of frog? And if you actually gave it to the electorate like that, this frog might disappear from this river over time for these houses. What would people be deciding then? I mean, he says Natural England wrote to 74 councils saying they had to halt house building because there was a risk that it would add pollution, pausing what Home Builders Federation estimates the construction of 145,000 homes. And I guess it depends on the definition of pollution. I guess it depends what they are saying would happen, because the government's saying we're going to get rid of the nutrient neutrality. And I think this is now becoming a real hot button issue because we've had sewage in the seas, because we've had people literally getting stomachache after going for a day out at the beach. It might be that these rules actually do free up things and get rid of slightly arcane laws. But I don't think the public, the electorate, is prepared to believe that right now.
And I think that is what is really interesting about this and sort of takes it into terms of the realm of politics rather than just around house building, is why Labour have made this change. So although in one sense, Colville and other people like Gove who are arguing that, look, nutrients that are created by house building are, a relatively small part of the problem in terms of Britain's waterways. It's estimated that perhaps only a third of the nutrients that end up in rivers and so on are from house building. Much of it comes from agriculture as opposed to that. That can all be true. But the thing is, you cannot divorce this story from the set of wider stories that we've had for a year or so now
100%.
Around sewage.
Right.
This and around Britain's polluted rivers and so on. This has become, you talk to Labour people about this. This has become one of those things that in focus groups, people just bring up completely involuntarily.
Because it's so visual as well.
So visual,
Britain
so visceral.
is full of shit. Is a really easy headline for the opposition to sell.
Yeah, I can't go and swim because, what's that kind of brownish sludge that's coming out of that pipe? My kids can't go and swim in the sea. We've just had the summer. It has become something that has both epitomised and come to epitomise kind of where this popular feeling is at with regards to Britain isn't working on something as basic as that. And it is also something which is so shareable. That has become, on Facebook, social media, memes, articles being shared about this. And it has become, and then you look at the polling as well, it's become one of the biggest issues that people have come to care about. Now, this just wasn't here. This wasn't sort of part of the landscape of British politics or the seascape of British politics, a year, 18 months ago. And so it is something that Labour think, okay, they can take a little bit of a hit on the idea of us, blocking houses and so on. They'll say we'll build them elsewhere. But it is an indicator.
I think you mean.
Well, quite. It is an indicator, though, of where Labour thinks the politics is around this, particularly in these more semi-rural seats that they're actually doing slightly better in, Mid-Beds, for example, that they're slightly doing better in than they would have ever imagined a few years ago. So it is an indicator of where they think the strength of politics is
we
going to
talked
be.
yesterday on the News Agency USA to political commentator David Frum, who talked about the difference between rationality and sentimentality, or sentiment rather. And he said, if you look at the US, the economy is doing really actually pretty well. It's recovering pretty well. They've got all the right data. They've got the jobs numbers in the right place. They've got the inflation numbers, much more under control. And yet people think Biden is, failing at the job, failing as president. And he said because people have started to put sentiment before, the rational data. And I think it's a really interesting one here for Labour, that there is a world in which, a grown-up government would say, we're going to work out our house building numbers and work it out alongside our environmental strategy. Like we shouldn't really be in an either or. We should be able to go, yes, we'll do that with that. And I guess Labour does have a point where, are the Conservatives really turning round now and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to find it, we're going to build houses now and we're going to do it by getting rid of that. And Labour can sort of go, you've had 13 years to do this. Like, please, you've had 13 years.
What?
But somewhere, there is probably a missing chink where you can look at some of those nutrient laws and go, there must be a way. There must be a way where you can actually end up building the houses and not pollute our rivers if we're prepared to think of how this is done. And I wonder whether Labour is slightly leaning into the fact that the Tories have set up what looks like this impossible choice.
Well, exactly. And we should also, if you're being a bit more cynical about it, you would also say, well, for a start, in terms of EU law, you'll remember this, Emily, during the Brexit years. Remember what was the mantra? The mantra, whenever there was concern about, but more whenever any MP during the sort of May Brexit deal and all that stuff, when there was concern, particularly from the opposition benches, of saying, well, this is just going to lead to dilution of environmental regulation of law, and the argument, including from people like Gove, I think,
particularly from Gove, who was the Environment Secretary at the
time, his saying, why on earth would we want to dilute environmental law? We've got the highest environmental standards in the world.
And we can make it stronger if we want.
And we can make it stronger.
Things can go up as well as down.
Quite so. And here we are now in a different position. You can also say that, look, this is 100,000 homes, sure, fine. Interesting timing of doing this as well, in the sense that what are some of the companies who are struggling at the moment? We've seen it in their share prices and so on. House building companies, home builders, because interest rates rising, increasingly suppressed demand in terms of for new builds and starts and so on, quite so. And so suddenly, out of nowhere, there is this change, which potentially could help house builders on starts that they've already begun on. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but we should also bear in mind, this will be a drop in the ocean. We're talking about 100,000 houses here. I've been chairing the National Housing Federation conference this week, Monday, Tuesday. That is just social housing. But their estimate, which is widely accepted, is we need 90,000 social homes, not just homes, social homes, i.e. council homes at affordable rent, every year for the next 10 years to even begin to make a dent on the enormous social housing waiting lists that there are. So that's just social homes. So 100,000 with regards to this, it might be nice to have, but it isn't going to make a systemic change to the problem we have. It's year one. And maybe it would make other changes as well. Maybe it would help other projects in future. But let's be honest, what we really need, and I suspect this is what the position Labour will end up on, is this is a small change in the grand scheme of things, or it would be. What you really need is systemic planning reform, which is something that, of course, Sunak's government retreated from under pressure from his MPs. You need to get away from a situation where, frankly, really quite modest objections from communities, NIMBYs, let's be honest, can stop development pretty easily. We've got one of the most regulated, tightly regulated, strictest set of planning laws and a planning apparatus anywhere in Europe. And you combine that with the fact that we've got a house building sector which is dominated by a very few select number of companies. So you have a situation where the land is very tightly controlled and the power to build is very tightly concentrated. This is the situation you end up in with a housing crisis.
The only problem I have with that phrase NIMBY, which basically means, and it's pretty insulting, it means you're small-minded and you only think about yourself and, you don't think about the wider good, is that actually one person's NIMBY is another person's, well, let's actually protect the environment and the rivers and stop it being polluted. I think they are two sides of the same coin, that actually all the people now saying, I don't want to see a housing development, that crashes through environmental protection, rivers, whatever, sulfates, phosphates, all the rest of it. That is NIMBYism. It's just a different kind of NIMBYism because we recognise that, sometimes the rules and the regulations do help and they do have a place.
There can be, you're right. And obviously the planning process has to take account of that. On the other hand, there is, I think, a slightly more cynical element of NIMBYism, and I think it can be an appropriate term, which is to say there is a type of person who will absolutely accept that we need house building, but it can never be anywhere near them. Yeah. And there does have to be a compromise. I mean, look, only 10% of the land in this country is developed. 15% of Scotland is devoted to grouse moor shooting. About 4% to 5% of England is devoted to grouse moor shooting, for goodness sake.
Those grouse are huge.
Well, they're massive, of course. Massive. Yeah, so we need to look after them. But, the fact of the matter is, this is not a country that, as is sometimes presented, that, is just basically one big load of tarmac and concrete from one end to the other. The truth is, there is a lot of, and dare I say this is something a lot of people never seem to ever want to accept, there is a lot of really unsatisfactory countryside in this country. We've got a slight tendency sometimes of just looking at a field and going, oh, isn't that nice? No, your average field is just as industrialised as an industrialised estate, right? As an industrial estate. Because guess what? England never used to look like that. England was one big forest, one big wood. We tore it all down over the last 2,000 years. And actually, we've just got a load of, quite boring fields. You know what? We can afford to lose some of them and actually build houses for younger people and at the same time not end up in a situation where we have sewage and sludge and environmental destruction everywhere we look.
Coming up after the break, we'll be talking dirty briefs, but a different kind. We'll be looking at the election campaigning in mid-beds and whether it's getting ugly. Welcome back. Now, yesterday on the newsagents, we inadvertently started a bit of a row. And that was between Labour and the Lib Dems over the mid-Bedfordshire by-election, that is Nadine Dorries' seat, that they will be fighting on October the 19th. And Peter Keir put out a fairly strong charge against the Lib Dem behaviour in this seat. And the Lib Dems responded quite angrily, saying he was out of order. But today we've seen an email. This has come from Lib Dems to Lib Dem members, and it's about the candidate themselves. And the candidate for Labour is Alistair Strathern, and he has been involved in Greenpeace protests. He is a Waltham Forest councillor, and the Lib Dem candidate is called Emma Holland Lindsay, and she is local to Mid-Beds. And in this email, it says, a Labour candidate who is vulnerable to significant attacks from a ruthless Conservative Party. And then they go on to say what the headlines from the Mail will be about the Labour candidate. And they have pictures from the paper and headlines from the Mail and from the Express and from the Sun. So this is a reminder of what Peter Keir said yesterday.
You asked about voters in mid-Bedfordshire, and I said that they are the most informed that I've ever come across. We have done almost no Conservative attack in that election so far. We have done zero Lib Dem attack, because that is a community that says we want to know the best of political parties going forward because we have experienced the worst. And what I'm seeing from the Lib Dems is deeply personal. It is aimed at the person, our candidate, not at the policies or politics of the person or the party. And I see hints and I sense
Have you said that to her, Davey? Have you said what on earth are you doing?
I've not had the opportunity to, but I sense a style of politics by the Lib Dems in mid-Bedfordshire which is reminiscent of the campaign they ran against Peter Tatchell in the 1980s. And I have no doubt, because they are so desperate to make an impact in mid-Bedfordshire, that if our candidate was gay, they'd be doing a family values campaign. That's the level to
You're
which
saying they're homophobic now?
No, I'm saying that they would go nowhere. Moral high ground does not count in the way the Lib Dems are acting in that constituency, and I don't.
Well, this is the right to reply of the Lib Dems. Christine Jardine, the Equalities Shadow Minister is here. Were you surprised by what you heard yesterday, Christine?
It's disappointing. I've no idea what he's talking about with this. And I heard the interview earlier, and he himself, when you asked him, couldn't tell you what the allegations were. It's very disappointing, because in this election campaign, what we should be doing is attacking the policies of this Conservative government and speaking to the electorate about why we can provide better representation. Why, from our perspective, Emma Holland-Lindsay would be an ideal MP who would represent the area. That's what it should be about. I don't understand why Peter is attacking us. Why is he not criticising the Conservative Party? Why is he not criticising their record in Mid-Bedfordshire? I agree with him on one thing. The electorate in Mid-Bedfordshire is very well informed.
Well, Christine, I suppose the reason is because they consider you to be their main opponent. I mean, this is the difference with this by-election compared to others we've seen, right? In other by-elections that we've seen in this Parliament, there is essentially, but there's no formal agreement, but it's been clear in each of the constituencies where the non-Conservative vote was going to go. This is a constituency in which you are both contesting it hard. So the reason that they're attacking you is because you're attacking them, and because you're both going for this. Well, you're both going for this constituency in a very hard, in a serious way, in a way that you haven't with the others. And the force that could potentially win out from that is the Conservatives.
No, what I see and what I hear from Mid-Bedfordshire is that this is a constituency which, like Chesham and Amersham and St Albans, which are just a stone's throw away, has the potential. It has an electorate who are unhappy with their Conservative representation. And we saw in Chesham and Amersham, North Shropshire, Tiverton and Honiton, Somerton and Frome, that constituencies like this, when the electorate are unhappy with their Conservative representation, the people they see as an alternative are the Liberal Democrats. It's not a Labour stronghold. It's not a Labour seat. It's a seat where we can appeal, and we are appealing, and we're hearing it on the doorsteps, to people who are dissatisfied with this Conservative government. And I don't understand why the Labour Party feel that. I mean, I take what you say. You're absolutely right. They obviously see us as the opposition, as the people who can win the seat.
Christine, let's get to the rub of it, because we went back to Peter Carr. We said, where's the evidence?
Yeah.
He sent us and showed us an email that your party sent out to Lib Dem members. And these are just some of the bits I'm going to read here. Labour have already shown in Uxbridge they cannot withstand and rebut those full frontal attacks. Here is a headline from the Mail, and you show the headline from the Mail. Here's the accompanying photo from the Greenpeace website, and you show a picture of the Labour candidate at a Greenpeace protest dressed on that day as a zombie. Here is the headline from the Express, Labour's zombie Greenpeace candidate. Here is the Sun. Now, I'm just wondering at what point the Lib Dems became the party that quoted right-wing newspaper headlines as part of their manifesto attack in a campaign.
No.
I mean,
that's an internal. You said yourself. That's an internal email.
That went out to Lib Dem members.
It went out to Lib Dem members
so that they push this forward.
No. It went out to Lib Dem members to say, look, we think we have a chance in Mid-Bedfordshire.
Why do you care? Why do you care how the Mail sees the candidate? Why do you care how the Sun
what
sees the
that was
candidate?
doing was, it was an incentive to local members to say, look, we can do it. If it's criticising anyone, it's criticising the Labour leadership for their lack of strategic awareness of what will appeal in terms of policies and approach
But
to
you don't care about that.
the electorate in Mid-Bedfordshire.
Look, it has a
But
bit of a...
every party cares about that when they're appealing to their own activists to go out. They say, look, we can win this because... And that's what we're saying. That's not, something for the doorsteps on Mid-Bedfordshire. That's not anything. That is purely to say to our members, come on, we've got to go out there and make an effort.
It had a slight touch of what I'm going to call that mean girls gossip, where you go up to somebody and you say... I obviously think you look great, but I'm just saying there are other people out there who think you look terrible. I'm really sorry that photo of you went everywhere. You must have felt awful. It feels like you're trying to do the work Of the Mail, of the Sun, of the Express for them.
No. What we are trying to do in everything we do in Mid-Bedfordshire is listen to what the people in Mid-Bedfordshire are telling us about why they are dissatisfied with this Conservative government. It's the same reasons we heard on the doorsteps in Tiverton and Honiton, Somerton and Frome, North Shropshire. It's a rural constituency where they are dissatisfied with, in this constituency in particular, problems with GPs. They've had a 6%, I think, reduction in the number of GPs in Mid-Bedfordshire at the same time as they've had an increase in population and number of people looking for a GP. So that's a problem. That's what we are talking to people about in the doorsteps, and that's what's important to people. What's really disappointing about this for me is that one of the things I get from people on the doors in my constituency in Edinburgh West and all over the country is that people are fed up with politicians taking a pop at each other, playing the man rather than the ball, to use a football analogy, not talking about the issues.
That's what they say you're doing to them.
No, what we are doing in Mid-Bedfordshire is talking about the issues which our candidate Emma Holland-Lindsay understands perfectly well, because she's a councillor in Bedfordshire. She understands the issues. She's listening to people. And that's what will be important to people when it comes to polling.
Christina, you
Who
say
is listening to them?
play the man, not the ball. I mean, this is the email, and this is the picture of the Labour candidate dressed as a zombie that you included in the email. I mean, if that's not playing the man, not the ball, then what is?
That's not criticising him. It's criticising. It's criticising the Labour leadership, and it's not an email. I've said it already. It's not an email which is a leaflet. It's not anything that's going out in the constituency. It was an internal email to our members, our activists, to say we have, an opportunity to win this seat because people are unhappy with the Conservatives, and we think that the Labour Party does not understand this constituency.
It also says in the email.
That's all.
It also says in the email, if you're trying to overturn the biggest majority ever in a constituency with traditional values, selecting this particular candidate makes your job pretty much impossible.
That's a criticism of the Labour leadership for not understanding.
What does traditional values mean?
Well, what they're talking about there is that you have a rural seat which is concerned about rural issues, which is concerned about GPs, which is concerned about all of these things, and that the Labour Party,
why would this particular candidate, Mr. Strathern, not understand those things?
It's not about him. It's not about him.
If you're selecting this particular candidate makes your job pretty much impossible. So
what did you mean by that? That's what we're saying.
Well,
what
I didn't
on earth
write
do you
the
mean
email,
by that?
but what I took from it was that we felt that we had picked an ideal candidate for Mid-Bedfordshire, someone who understands.
Of course you would. I would hope you would.
Well, we
Labour
would,
Party
yes.
thinks that as well.
Yeah, but we felt that we had picked a better candidate than they had, because we had picked someone who, as I said, is a councillor in Bedfordshire, who understands the constituency and who understands the issues that matter to people there. And that is all that it was about. Now, to try and make the by-election about an internal email, I think is to miss the point. This by-election, like the one which I now understand is going to be in Tamworth on the same day, is about what the people in that constituency want from their representatives. And they've been let down in Mid-Bedfordshire badly, I think, by their previous Conservative MP, who I don't think had the sort of presence in the constituency, the sort of, awareness of the constituency that the people deserve, and that we as Liberal Democrats like to think that we provide. I think that that's what will be important here.
Christine, isn't that the point? That, you've got people in Mid-Beds who haven't had any representation for the last few years.
Absolutely.
Thinking they're about to get grown-up politics. Yeah. And instead of there being something that suggests, one party or another is going to get in, they see you two fighting it out, slugging it out.
We're not. We're criticising the Conservative Party. What we are saying...
But I'm just saying, you're both standing in a seat that arguably would have been a really easy one for one or other of you to lose, and which you might actually cede to the Conservatives again.
I don't think so. I think what we have in Mid-Bedfordshire, like in close constituencies I've already mentioned, is an electorate people who are fed up, as you said, with a lack of representation. And they recognise that as Liberal Democrats, we put community first. We are there representing the community, and that is what they want. This is not a seat in which Labour has a great record. If you look at Tamworth, for example.
They came second.
They came second.
Yeah, but they've never won it. If you look at Tamworth, for example, Tamworth.
You never won it either.
Hang on a second. Tamworth, which is going to be on the same day, I understand it, is a seat that they won in 97. They also won Selby in 97 when they won the general election. They didn't win Mid-Bedfordshire. And the reason they didn't win Mid-Bedfordshire is because it's a rural constituency. It's not the sort of constituency where Labour traditionally win. Now, they may have come second the last time, but you now have a Conservative electorate who are unhappy, who are looking for somebody else to vote for. In those circumstances, in that constituency, they are more likely to vote Liberal Democrat.
Did Ed Davey
than
go
Labour.
to Keir Starmer and say, please don't run here? Did that
No, why would
conversation
they?
happen?
No, we wouldn't do that, because I don't think that's democracy. I think people in every constituency in this country have the right to vote for who they want. Now, we might think that we have a much better chance and believe that we are going to win Mid-Bedfordshire, but that doesn't mean that people shouldn't have the opportunity to vote for every
But it has
party
happened
if they
elsewhere,
want
hasn't
to.
it, Christine? I mean, in the other by-elections I mentioned, and one of the hallmarks of this
No, it
parliament.
hasn't.
Well,
There is no pact between us
no.
and
But
the
it's been.
Labour
Well, some
as
said
you
for
know,
them they
it's
didn't
happened
spend the
on
money.
on a nod and
Well,
a
that
wink.
was up to them. That was a decision by the Labour
And
Party
you've done it
because
as well.
they recognised.
You did it in Selby. You didn't campaign hard in Selby.
We didn't think we had a chance of winning in Selby. We put our resources where we think we have a good chance of winning, and that the electorate will recognise in us people who are in tune with them. And we put our resources there because our resources are not limitless. We didn't put resources into Selby because we didn't think we could win in Selby, and we didn't think people would vote for us in Selby. We believe that the people in Mid-Bedfordshire are people who are in tune with our beliefs, who are in tune with our policies, and will vote for us because they are fed up with the Conservative Party. That's why we're putting our resources there.
Doesn't augur particularly well for the general election, does it? Can't sort these things out between you.
Well, it's not up to us.
Conservatives are the enemy, aren't they?
It's not up to us to sort it out between us. It's up to the electorate. They have to have the choice in who they want. And there are
But you
seats.
can understand an elector if you were in Mid-Bedfordshire and you just thought you wanted a non-Conservative to win that seat, you can understand you'd be pretty confused right now as to who to vote for.
I think if you're a voter in Mid-Bedfordshire, or for that matter any other part of the country, you look at the government and you think, what's the best chance I have of changing the government, of beating the Conservatives, and you look at the party who you think can do that and who is most in tune with your values and what you want to see and the representation you want. And I think in Mid-Bedfordshire, that's us. I accept that in other parts of the country, that will be the Labour Party. But Mid-Bedfordshire is not one of those areas.
Thanks so much for coming in. Thanks.
You're welcome.
You know, Millie, that really reminds me of something which we've kind of forgotten in recent years, because obviously they've been on the opposition benches together and they've often worked together in parliamentary terms, particularly in the Brexit period. But it's how much Labour and the Lib Dems used to really hate each other, and still in so many ways kind of do. I mean, in the Blair years, for example, I mean, you know, particularly at a local level, the dislike was absolutely visceral. And actually, it's something that Labour and the Conservatives kind of have in common, which is particularly at a local level, they usually regard each other as opponents. But if the Lib Dems are nearby, they really dislike them, because they often consider them, I mean, particularly in the Blair period, the argument against them was always they used to run to the left of Labour in Labour areas, and they'd run to the right of the Conservatives in Tory areas. And that kind of changed under the coalition because they had to sort of really believe in something. But it is a little glimmer, perhaps, into not only what some of the politics around particular seats where both are competitive will look like in the general election, but also potentially beyond that in the next parliament as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I was quite struck by the ferocity of Peter Carl's words yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, he really, and he didn't back down at all afterwards. And the Lib Dems got straight back and said, right, you know, we want a right reply. We don't think anything we've done is wrong. But what you have to entertain is the possibility, just, you know, going back to the numbers now, which is that the people of Mid-Beds, the voters in Mid-Beds, are thinking, oh, great, we finally get to elect a new leader. We finally get to, you know, get rid of Nadine Dorries, who hasn't actually shown up, not a party political thing, but just, you know, having the representation in their own constituency. And right now, there is every chance that if the vote is split between two very vocal, warring second and third parties, that the Conservatives come through the middle again. And I wonder if that will sort of, you keep coming back to, well, this is democracy, and democracy is wonderful and messy and all those things, and that kind of happens. But will they start, if that happens, just to look a little bit more carefully at how they're waging these battles?
Yeah, I mean, again, another absurdity of our electoral system, that the voters have to kind of make this calculation, but it is what we have. The person who, of course, will be most happy, and I think that this is a perfectly credible outcome, is, of course, Sunak, because we now know, as Christine was saying, we now know there are going to be 2 by-elections on October the 19th. One in Mid-Beds, the other one in Tamworth, after Pincher's resignation. Now, I think that the Labour will really be the hot favourites for Tamworth. As Christine was saying, they used to have the seat, despite the fact the Tory majority is very large. If Sunak were to lose both these rock-solid Conservative seats, that would be really, really, really bad for him.
And to lose both to the same party.
And to lose both to the same party, or either. This would represent... I think, it's not inconceivable that... I mean, there are these murmurs of this, of letters going in about his leadership. I don't think it's inconceivable that we could be in a state where those rumours start to... I don't think it would happen immediately, would start to accelerate. If, though, they can squeeze out a win in Mid-Beds, again, the entire narrative changes. And it will all become, as we saw with Uxbridge, the story will instantly switch not to, oh my God, they've lost Tamworth, that's really bad, and they probably almost lost Mid-Beds. It will be, oh, look at the Lib Dems and Labour, they can't get their act together under any circumstances. And it'll change the narrative and allow Sunak, even though Tamworth would be really bad, to squeak through.
We are a month away from that, though. In fact, we are going to be in Mid-Beds talking to people on their doorsteps.
Are we?
Yes, I'm just announcing that on the show.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
Well, when
we're
we going
next
there?
week, and we're going to
Okay.
find out what actually is happening beneath the waves.
Well, we've got to go now. That's it. That's like when Blair went on
Hold our feet
Frost.
to the fire.
That's like when Blair went on Frost and just announced that they were going to increase NHS spending by.
I'd do that. If I was Prime Minister, I'd just do that the whole time.
Yeah,
Great.
just say it. Cost us billions. You just cost us about 60 quid.
At least.
At least.
Probation, prison, schools, China. Yet again, Inaction man fails to heed the warnings and then blames everyone else for the consequences.
Well, we'd like to make a correction here on the newsagents, because Rishi Sunak's spokesperson has just come back to Keir Starmer on that one and said Rishi Sunak is, quotation marks, a man of action. So there you go.
Well,
That's a right of reply clarified again.
That's sorted that conundrum then, hasn't it? That's...
It is funny, isn't it, that the role that superheroes have in Prime Minister's questions. I'm sure there's a dissertation on not just Captain Hindsight, but now Inaction.
You're going to write that?
Right.
You're going to announce that you're going to write that, just like you just announced that we're going to...
But it means it hurt.
Yeah, oh,
It
totally.
means it hurt. To get your spokesperson to say, if somebody said to me, if you call me, oi, mateless, where are your mates? I wouldn't actually say, oh, only mates.
Do you get that on Twitter?
No, I don't.
You know what I
just
get on
literally-
Twitter sometimes? I'm sorry, I'm
Go on.
quoting someone again. My mother's not going to be like me swearing here, but occasionally I get a really good one, which is, oh, it's Lewis good for fuck all.
Good for
That's
fuck all.
quite a good one.
Yeah, I get that.
I'm now going to
But
get
you're
that a
not
lot.
going to get your spokesman person to call up and go, actually, Lewis is good for very many things. Or,
I
Emily
would. Oh,
has
I would
many
definitely
mates.
do that. I would get Tom, our editor, to put out a press release saying, "No, we don't recognise that picture at all.
Not
he's
at
good
all.
at least. He's good at quite a few things.
Yeah, he's good at 3 things.
He's good at 3
And then
things,
they've
yeah.
named them.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Just like
He can
it would
talk
have
for a
my
while.
mates' names underneath my
Yeah.
name. So you can call these people to check.
Well, again.
Anyway, so
it-
clearly that sort of hurt.
Yeah, and it goes back. Look, it was a pretty tortured Prime Minister's questions in the sense that
It wasn't
again,
particularly good for either, was it?
well, no, but at the same time, it was again Sunak scrambling around, trying to find any sort of narrative. Breaking glass in case of emergency, brings out the Corbyn stuff. Started to suggest that there were more prison escapees under Labour in the late 90s and early 2000s than there are now. As if anyone really cares or remembers anything about that. And again, he's just, I suspect Starmer now, he'll return to Inaction Man. They've obviously focus grouped it. They're going to use it again and again. And it just speaks to that sort of sense of malaise that there is, right?
Do you think like listeners to this are just sort of like dropping their jaws at the idea that money is being spent in focus groups?
What do you
and
think of
on
Inaction
polling?
Man?
Yeah, can I just run a few of these past you? We're going to
Mateless.
try.
What do you think of that?
We're going to try No Action Man, Inaction Man, or Captain Foresight. Which do you like the best?
Yep.
And this is somebody's profession. Somebody's profession is to go and find the perfect phrase that they can shout out at Prime Minister's questions.
Another news, by the way, we're going to Suva in Fiji on an OB. Yeah, no, I've
true,
announced
we
it
are.
now, so we're
We have
off to
to
do
go.
that. We're going to go and look at the coral reefs. Yeah.
We
We can meet up with John while we're there.
Maldives.
He's probably busy with the Australian Prime Minister, actually. I think
Very
he's having
busy.
lunch with Malcolm
He'll be back
Turnbull.
one day.
One day?
I
One
actually
day.
thought neither of you were coming back.
Excuse me. I mean, you had a summer sojourn, like you were sort of English Earl in the 19th century
I went
for the whole
off for a
month.
3-month tour of the Levant.
Yeah,
And what's wrong with that?
absolutely nothing.
Thank you very much.
See you in Suva.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.